February 13th, 2017 was an unseasonably warm day in the small rural town of Delphi, Indiana. It's not a place where you worry when teenagers decide to go on an adventure. So when Abby Williams and her best friend Libby German decided to go on a hike near the Monon High Bridge in the middle of the day, no one gave it a second thought. But when the pair didn't show up when they were supposed to get picked up, their families began to worry and they began to search. Then the next day, the unimaginable. The girls' bodies were found, both victims of murder. As the investigation progressed over 7 years, there were sketches of the suspect that looked like two different people, and there was video of the killer, bravely recorded by Libby. Then 5 years after their deaths, an arrest of the accused murderer, Richard Allen. Allen claims he's innocent. He also alleges it was a group of Odinites who are responsible, white nationalists practicing the ancient Nordic religion. This case has also been buried in legal controversy involving Allen's attorneys, who were on the case, off the case, and replaced, and then back on the case. Tonight, details on a big 3-day hearing in the case, plus the defendant's push to get the case thrown out.
I'm Vinny Politan. Thank you for joining us. Let me tell you, the Delphi murder case, this one frustrates me more than most cases for many reasons. And that frustration continues on every front. I don't understand what has happened in this case, why it happened, and what is still happening now in the legal process that is following this case. It makes no sense to me. It has me frustrated, and it's been way too long for Abby and Libby. Way too long for them and their families to get justice. And justice in this case is getting to the truth. And that truth's going to come out inside of a courtroom, because no one is stepping up to confess or admit to this crime and plead guilty. That's not happening. So the truth has to come out in a courtroom. And you can't get into a courtroom until the investigation is over. This investigation was unreasonably and unjustifiably delayed because of mistakes that were made. And now we're getting into the system of justice, and things are completely off the rails. And who pays the price? Well, to begin with, it's Abby, Libby, and their families, because it's been way too long. Now, the defendant in this case, he's telling everybody you have the wrong guy, that he did not do it. It wasn't me. It was someone else. And as this investigation was going on, there were other people that were looked at. There are a lot of other people acting in ways that are somewhat suspicious. I don't want to call them suspects, but acting in a way that is very, very suspicious. And there's a lot of people who've looked at this case, and people have different theories. People have written books with different theories. But Richard Allen is the man that investigators and prosecutors say is responsible, but he's saying, listen, you've got the wrong guy. It wasn't me, it was the Odinists. The Odinists. They're the ones who did it. And when this was first stated, I chuckled. I actually chuckled, until I started reading some more of the documents, and I was like, okay, it's not just the defense that was believing this. There were investigators working the case that were working this angle, and that's where the defense got it from. They didn't go out on their own, and dig up some Odinists. What they did is they got discovery, they figured things out, and they took a look at what some of the other members of the team were looking at in this case. Ultimately, they believed that was the wrong direction. But that's where it comes from. So with that in mind, there's going to be a lot of issues in this case, and the judge in this case has to make some very big decisions before this trial starts. And the reason these decisions are so big is because they will determine exactly what this jury is going to hear and what this jury is not going to hear. I'm a former prosecutor. I understand that the nature of the evidence, what is permitted and not permitted, in most cases makes a marginal difference. In this case, it could make a huge difference for the victim's family and a huge difference for the defendant, Richard Allen. So there are some hearings this week where the judge is listening to the arguments and taking a look at the issues and taking a look at the evidence and what each side wants in, what they want out, what they want done here. Like I said, these are big decisions. But one of the decisions has been made, and that's very clear. No cameras inside these courtrooms. No microphones either. So how are we going to figure out what's going on? We've got to bring in people who are there, people who know every piece of evidence in this case, people who've been following this story from the beginning, and we've got them tonight. Joining me, co-hosts of the Murder Sheet podcast, Anya Kane and Kevin Greenlee. Also with us, investigative journalist and author of the book, Down the Hill, Susan Hendricks. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. There's a lot going on inside the courtroom. I understand that. Big arguments, big issues, big decisions that have to be made. I want to start with one that I think is extremely significant, which is the confession or confessions or alleged confessions of the defendant himself. Okay? So, Anya, Kevin, I'll begin with you. What has the judge been listening to, and what type of alleged confessions are we talking about here?
So I would say that today was a pretty devastating day for the defense team. We learned that there have been over 60 confessions, many of which have been recorded on video and audio, and some of which actually include a number of specific details about the crime that only the killer would know. And those have been to a myriad of different people, including Allen's wife and mother, including prison staff, including other fellow inmates, but it's not just one person, it's at least 30. So there was a period of time after finding God that Allen was essentially telling everyone who would listen that he was guilty, he was sorry for what he did, and in order to join his family in heaven after dying, he needed to make a clean break of it and explain to everyone what he had done to those two girls in the trails of Delphi that day.
Now, did you say 60 alleged confessions?
Over 60 was the conservative estimate by Detective Brian Harshman, who was the last witness in today's hearing, but perhaps the most significant because he gave the most details about the case.
It was a shocking moment. People in the courtroom, their mouths were agape. It was unbelievable. It was a real game changer.
Susan, describe that moment for us.
Oh, it was the end of the day, as you know, Vinny, being in a courtroom as the day drags on and you get little breaks and you feel people kind of shifting in their chairs. I was just in court all day with Anya and Kevin. I'm in my hotel room. Hope the shot looks good. It's last minute. But so we're in there and it's last minute. And he gets called to the stand and he said, I've been in law enforcement 30 plus years, 17 years as a detective. And then you hear what he has listened to, 600 phone calls from Richard Allen, 600, and a lot of confessions, and he was going through exactly what was said, and he was so on point. It was, as Anya and Kevin said, everyone's taken aback by, oh my gosh, that's what was said, oh my gosh, because as you know, the defense does not want any of the confessions allowed in. And he was just, I mean, as a witness, Vinny, as you know, a star witness, I would call him, Detective Brian Harshman. Something that stood out to me, though, because I was on the side of the family. I was sitting next to Becky and also next to Tara and Libby's grandmother and Libby's aunt. And one of the statements that he allegedly made through the phone calls that Harshman has listened to, all 600, was he's sorry for killing Abby. And nothing about Libby. And then I saw Becky cry. And I have a straight view to Richard Allen, straight view. And this was the first time I've seen him in person. And yesterday I was there. And what stood out to me, Vinny, he turned around to us, I'm with the families, and glared and didn't lose the stare. And I said, what's going on to Tara? And she said, oh, he always does this. And he doesn't lose the gaze in your eyes. It's creepy, to say the least, and it's bizarre. And I don't know, maybe it is of course, they're trying to allege that he lost his sanity because he was in a prison and not in a jail, which he should be. But there's so much at stake here, as you mentioned, and the judge has a lot of decisions to make. But the confessions, I mean, think about how many. And the jailhouse calls, and as you know, Vinny, they tell you this is being recorded. They even tell Richard Allen's wife, this is being recorded. So it's not hidden. They know what they're saying is being recorded.
So, Kevin, was any of this played inside the courtroom? Did
It was not a word of it was played. We just heard Detective Harshman describe the contents of these phone calls. He described them in some detail. He even described how Richard Allen's mother and wife reacted when he called them for the first time and said, I did this. He said that Richard Allen's mother said, oh, they must be messing with your mind. And Kathy Allen said, stop talking, I'm going to call Brad. And then she abruptly hung up and then presumably called Brad Rosie, who's one of Richard Allen's defense attorneys.
Now, something else. I mean, the defense has filed some papers on all of this, and they're making the allegation that Richard Allen confessed to molesting the two young girls and also shooting them in the back. Were they shot in the back?
They were not.
No. So that's, and sorry if I'm answering, if you wanted Anya and Kevin too, but the defense is saying, look, Rosie stood up and said, look, there's some allegations here that weren't true, meaning shot in the back. So what the defense is trying to establish is, look, because he was in this prison and because he was treated so poorly and because this weighed on his mental state, that he was just saying anything and everything, meaning they weren't molested, meaning they weren't shot in the back. So how can you take some things to be true and other things not to be true?
Go ahead, Anya. I know you wanted to jump in on this. So is the allegation that he's making 60 confessions that aren't consistent with one another, saying different things at different times about what happened?
That was brought up, and what I thought was super interesting was Detective Harshman mentioned that he believed that may have come from an interview with an inmate. So basically, there may be a game of telephone going on where inmates are hearing him confess and then relaying that back incorrectly. But as far as actual recorded statements, we didn't hear anything about inaccuracies from what he's actually recorded saying.
Okay, so some of these alleged confessions that the defense is referencing might actually be referencing statements made to other inmates, and the other inmates are relaying that information. So that would make some sense. Susan, is the family hearing this stuff for the very first time inside the courtroom?
Oh, yeah, I'm right next to them. It's the first day I was with Anya and Kevin, and there is a community in that courtroom who supports the family and who is online. And I see Becky for the first time, and she says, sit between us. I said, it's not appropriate. I should sit with the family. She said, no. So I haven't bird's eye view from the family side. And I see Richard Allen looking their way, and I see the people on the stand looking their way, and I hear what they're saying for the first time. And I will say that of course, they're strong. They want to be there. They're going to be there every single day. But Becky, what really hurt her, several things did. What they mentioned today, speaking of Brian Harshman, he said, yes, he spoke to what motivated him to do this. And I'm thinking, what is it? I'm leaning, he didn't mention that. Maybe that's for trial. So many times he's mentioned things on the phone, but I could tell where Rosie is going. He said to this detective who's been in law enforcement 30 plus years, so you had a plan. This was the plan, to get all these recorded phone calls, alluding to the fact that all law enforcement wanted to get together and say, this is the guy, this is who we think it is. Let's drive him crazy by keeping the crazy, quote unquote, by keeping the lights on in his cell and giving him mental, because they did mention that he didn't feel physically abused. He was asked that. He felt mentally abused. So I could see where the defense is going, saying they wore him down mentally, that he did make these false confessions. But they did try to wipe out some of them. Fran Gull making no decisions yet. Tomorrow's another hearing. We'll see what she decides. But these are key moments. It feels like a mini trial to me.
Absolutely. I mean, and like you said, this is game-changing stuff. How about the defense? Because the one thing that, took us aback a little bit was the level of aggressiveness of the defense in, hey, listen, this guy, it's not that you can't prove it, it's he didn't do it, we know who did, and it's these other people connected to Odinism. Do you get the sense from these hearings that the defense is still all in on those types of arguments and theories? Kevin, what do you think?
I think we'll really get the answer to that tomorrow, because tomorrow is going to focus on whether or not the defense is even going to be allowed to talk about Odinism in the actual trial. In order to do that, they're going to have to convince the judge that there is a connection between the Odinists and these murders. And they are going to present whatever evidence they have to that effect tomorrow. So that will be their chance to try to undo what happened this evening, which would be a pretty high hurdle to clear. And frankly, I'm not sure it's possible.
And Anya, am I correct that a lot of the information connected to the Odinism, there was this task force, and there were some members of the task force who were trying to solve the case that were going down that road for a certain amount of time?
Yes, and in fact, they had one of those officers up on the stand yesterday, Kevin Murphy, formerly of the Indiana State Police. And one thing that stuck with me that they asked of him was essentially, were you ever able to connect Brad Holder directly with the crime? And his answer was an emphatic no. So you had people on that investigation who are admitting, we didn't get there. We didn't get to probable cause. We didn't get to the arrest requests at that point. And so I think that's important to remember, that even people on that team are kind of maybe saying, well, we didn't quite get there. Although it sounds like they did quite a good investigation and certainly were looking into it very intently.
And if they did do the investigation, right, then it should be relatively easy for the defense to show that, listen, the investigation did not lead to them. We did the investigation. This isn't new stuff.
Well, he mentioned, he did mention, he said, look, he was asked this. So was he a suspect? On the stand yesterday, he said, well, in certain circles. So you could see the divide in law enforcement. So I think therein lies the problem of what was true and what was not. It felt like two separate investigations.
And from my experience in the courtroom, those are the seeds of reasonable doubt.
Well,
right?
One thing I would just interject here is that one thing that's notable, as Murphy mentioned, that he only worked on this case for, essentially a year. Mm-hmm. So he's not one of the people that was there from the beginning. You had this sort of group form and then seemingly go nowhere and move away. And they were not necessarily the same people who've been with this for 7 years. So I think while people will find these folks credible, they're law enforcement officers, and they certainly did some sincere work on this. I don't know that it's necessarily going to turn the tide as much as we thought it might originally, just because they don't have that long-term experience with it.
And what's the sense in the community, Susan, now, as with this? I mean, this has been a long time, obviously super high profile, but obviously a very small community as well. I mean, we're looking at pictures right now. This is a small community.
Yeah, very small. Very small. I took an Uber from Lafayette, where I am, this morning at 4:30, because you have to line up. No press passes at all. So you're lining up, but I look at it as a way to get to know people. I mean, I've gotten rides home for people who have YouTube channels. I mean, it's just this community. Everybody's there, and you're kind of all in it together. But the Uber driver said to me, look, this really hurt our community. It really did. And you think about Abby and Libby, and it gets lost in all of this. I'm sitting next to the family member, so I'm always remembering. But as you know, the nuance right now is being discussed. And tomorrow's a big day. And as you're looking on your screen, you see allegedly what's Richard Allen, bridge guy, walking on the bridge. What the defense wants is what's on Libby's phone to not be admissible, to not be in there, saying, and I believe this is why, that it was handed over to discovery too late. I'm not sure why, but there's obviously something on that phone. What stood out to me today, what Anya touched on, was it seems like Richard Allen, and Detective Harshman mentioned it. He said there seemed to be a time where he found God, and then he shifted and he started to confess a lot more to his mother and his wife, and they wouldn't accept it. They're ruining your mind there. It didn't happen. So what's on Libby's phone? Of course, that defense does not. And I'm wondering, is it because it's his voice down the hill? And will they compare the voice to Richard Allen in court? I'm not sure, but tomorrow's a big day as well.
Absolutely. So as we sit here tonight, you've all been in the courtroom. You've been hearing a lot of information, some of it for the very first time. What lingering questions do each one of you have? Anya, what's your lingering question?
My lingering question is, how is the defense going to overcome this mountain of confessions and incriminating statements in a way that's convincing to a jury? Because I think an elaborate Odinist theory, while very interesting, may not be the ticket to explaining why was he saying this. And even if they manage to get a few confessions thrown out, that still leaves dozens more. So I'd really love to know what's next for them. How are they considering this?
Kevin, what lingering question do you have?
I think I'm in that camp as well. I'm also curious about how exactly Richard Allen, assuming he was a guilty person, was able to live in this community for so long with that secret without giving it away.
Susan?
I have two. Okay, on the legal side, because Rosie was, and by the way, the judge said today, where's Baldwin? Oh, he has other obligations. He just wasn't there today. So with Rosie, and I could see where he's going with this, it feels like he wasn't treated the way he should have been treated in terms of solitary confinement. That's where they're going. And someone who's not convicted should be in a jail. That to me is concerning for that side. Personally, I'd like to know, because they started that, the prosecution was saying on those phone calls, saying to Detective Harshman, he talks about motive for doing this. And he says yes. And I want to know, what is it? Because, Vinny, we never know why. And I don't know if there's ever an adequate answer, but I want to know, what was the motive? Why would you do this if you did it?
Absolutely. Was it just like a chance meeting? I still don't understand.
And did you, at 44, you do it for the first time?
For the
You're
first time,
murder
right.
two girls for the first time at 44?
Yeah, there's clearly more to this story, and obviously Anya Kane, Kevin Greenlee, and Susan Hendricks will be on top of it. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate your time, your insight, and we'll see you again perhaps tomorrow. Who knows? Okay, when we come back, we'll bring in our think tank, get their breakdown of what's happening in this case, plus coming up next hour.
A dramatic ending to the Black Swan murder trial. The jury has spoken in the case against Ashley Benefield. The former ballerina is now behind bars as a killer. We hear from the victim's family claiming justice for Doug Benefield.
Biggest moments in the wife stabs husband murder trial. Plus, a voice for victims in the tragic story of a 6-year-old's death and a father now facing sentencing.
Opening statements with Julie Grant. Mornings at 8/7 Central on Court TV. Sunday, August 11th, the season finale of Accomplice to Murder.
The horrors they uncovered are horrors not even inflicted upon prisoners of war.
Accomplice to Murder with Vinnie Politan. Season finale, Sunday, August 11th, 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
Some of the people that live in Delphi were very brazen about their Odinistic beliefs on their Facebook pages and other social media accounts, including the sergeant who was in charge of keeping Mr. Allen safe in Westville. It's real. Just the other day, Robert and I were going to lunch, and we saw a Jeep Wrangler right here in Fort Wayne with a spare tire on the back, and the cover said Odin, and it had all Odin spears like around on the cover. I would have never known what that meant, and outside of this case. So Mr. Baldwin and Mr. Rosie were onto something right away.
This is what we believe the defense will be. It's about, at least what they want it to be, about the Odinists. And yeah, it's real. I mean, the more that you get into it and you start looking at things like, well, yeah, there are people like this, but are they doing satanical rituals? Are they sacrificing children? I don't know, but there are people who, I guess, practice Odinism or have some connections to Odinism in that area, for sure, for sure. Take a look at this, and the defense defined it for us. Members of a pagan Norse religion called Odinism, hijacked by white nationalists, ritualistically sacrificed Abigail Williams and Liberty German. That's their defense. And it's based on a bunch of things. Now, this is what they want to put in front of the jury. But what the judge has to decide now is whether or not the jury gets to hear any of that because of the state's motion in limine. They don't want the jury to hear the following. The prosecuting attorney respectfully requests that the court enter an order requiring the defendant or his counsels to refrain from mentioning in the presence of the jury during voir dire, opening argument, which should be an opening statement, presentation of evidence, and closing argument, any and all references to the following either directly or indirectly: Odinism, cult or ritualistic killing, and then the redacted names of some alleged Odinists. We've redacted them for you. Keegan Klein, who's a local man who pleaded guilty to possession of a lot of child pornography. Another redacted name, and Ron Logan, who was the man who owned the property on which the girls were found dead, who also got someone to try to lie for him about his alibi for that day. Now, he's no longer alive, but they don't want him to mention his name either. So how is this going to go down? What's fair? What's not fair? Let's bring in our think tank. Joining us live in studio tonight, criminal defense attorney, entertainment attorney, and former assistant DA in Atlanta, GA, Daryl Cohen. Also with us tonight, criminal defense attorney, Eklund Mercy. And finally, criminal defense attorney, the man behind the glasses, Josh Schiffer. Great to see everyone. Daryl, prosecutors are trying to limit what the defense can talk about here. Why do they want to limit it? Why?
Because as a prosecutor, you want to always use the KISS method. Keep it short, stupid. Keep it simple, stupid.
I
and let
get
them
it,
focus
but that's
in.
your case. Why are they trying to keep it out of the defense case? The Odinists were investigated by the task force.
Because it is not relevant to this case as far as the prosecution is concerned. The prosecution has how many confessions? 1, 2, 3, 6 times 3 times 4, 600?
60, but
That's
they
all?
want some of them thrown out because they're inconsistent with the other confessions.
Oh my gosh, let's throw out 30.
Okay. Eklund, is it fair? Is it right? Should the jury, if the jury's trying to figure out the truth of what happened here, should they hear about Odinism?
Yeah. I think it's all relevant, especially if it's the defense. I think that people should know that there's no statute of limitation on murder. And if you have evidence that may lead to the actual criminal, then let's investigate. Instead of, let's not try egos and let's find out what's actually happening. So if they're not going to investigate, they should let it all in.
How many stories do we know from history where 20, 30, 50 years later, when some people have done, oh yeah, no, we totally pinned that on the wrong people? Because the real criminals were elected officials involved in law enforcement, high society people, and those people got away with murder hundreds, if not thousands of times in United States history. That could be happening here. Now, everybody from the state and law and order is going to tell you how much they love truth and how you get a day in court for your truth. Until people realize what the state's doing is intentionally hiding the truth to tell their version of facts to a jury.
NTJ, nice try, Josh. Didn't work.
We're getting you an anagram.
They found a
for Christmas,
PFA, they
man.
found a defense, they picked it from air, settled on it, and this is what we're going to go with.
But it derived from the task force that was trying to solve the case.
That part.
I'm trying to understand, right? Like a jury, their job is to figure out what happened. Why should we limit what investigators were looking at. It's not, the defense, like I know a lot of times they do. They pick stuff out of thin air. But this wasn't out of thin air. This is from the investigatory files of the task force. There were members of the task force that believed this was the truth.
20 years ago, if you'd said, hey, by the way, in the war against gangs, law enforcement's the best and they're not going to form any gangs. And now what do we find out? There are law enforcement gangs with tattoos and gang numbers. Same thing. Why the state would want to stop and why a judge would want to stop something from the state's own investigation? Insane.
And I think it's kind of arrogant to just believe that you're going to get it the first time, every time. People mess up. Investigations are faulty. The idea that, hey, because we pinned it on this particular person, let's just go full steam ahead. You may have messed up. You may have to retract some things. You may have to stop and make sure that because it's the state versus the defendant.
No, it's not.
The defendant is part of the state.
They didn't.
It's the state
no,
versus the defendant.
It is the facts
and the
versus the non-facts.
It's part of the state. The state has to provide all of the evidence.
If it was the facts,
that's
Daryl,
exculpatory as well as prosecute. Like, you have to, he's a part of the state. So he deserves his rights to be honored as well. And so make it right. It's either you're going to investigate or let it in. That's it. Those are your choices.
They investigated and they chose. And
there's a
let me throw this into the mix because there's two other people. Ron Logan is a man. He's passed away subsequently, but this is the man who owned the property where Abby and Libby were found, and here he was getting in trouble for something else, but he actually asked someone to lie about where he was that day. He was interviewed by local news, and I think we have a still frame of this, which I found very interesting as well. This is like the day after the girls go missing. He gets interviewed by local media wearing an outfit that is somewhat similar to what the suspect is wearing. And should the jury hear about this guy?
If it's relevant, certainly. If it's not relevant, not. But there's something called cross-examination.
They're found on his property.
My point is there's something called cross-examination, and the defense is not precluded from bringing forth evidence. It is not a one-way street. It's a two-way street.
So the prosecution wants to keep out of from the jury the name of the man who owned the property, the private property where the girls were found. Like, I'm trying to, I don't understand. I'm a former prosecutor. I'm like, I want the facts out there, and I believe in my case. I'm going to prove my case beyond a reasonable doubt, but I'm not going to try to prevent the defense from presenting evidence that was actually uncovered by us. Like, that doesn't make sense. I've never heard of this before.
That's real fishy.
Where have I heard of this before? Has this happened in any of your cases, Daryl?
It's an OTO. It's a one-time only. It makes no sense to me. But I would like to know why they want to keep it out. It makes no sense.
It sounds real Ahmaud Arbery to me. It sounds real just fishy in how we have this major defense. We have this absolutely different theory that a whole task force has highlighted, and we're just going to keep going against this one man. It makes no sense.
It makes perfect sense.
And here's,
I confess. How many times?
Here's 60. The problem. 60 confessions,
all?
Most of which were incarceration while he's suffering from mental delusions.
The fact that it's
but more
60
important
gives
is
me a
this.
problem.
If the state is so confident that they have it right, that they're willing to put a man in prison forever, why are they afraid of a jury hearing these names?
Great question.
Why are they that chicken?
The discussion continues. Good news, they're staying with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about a specific third-party suspect that the defense believes the prosecution is hiding evidence of. That's the killer. That is the killer right there. They had that video from the beginning. There's more to that video, but they just haven't made it public. But it took years and years and years to make an arrest of a man who, the day after, told one of the investigators, yeah, I was there. And then that piece of paper ended up on the bottom of a pile somewhere, and no one looked at it for half a decade. Half a decade. And now you've got the alleged killer in custody. But the defense has an alleged third-party suspect in all of this. Take a look up on the screen. This third-party suspect, we're not going to name him, but his son was dating one of the victims, Abby Williams. This third-party suspect would visit a friend in Delphi to practice Asatru/Odinist rituals. Images on his Facebook page allegedly resembled the crime scene. Also alleged here in their motion to dismiss that on February 17, 2017, the interview of this third-party suspect was destroyed while in the possession of law enforcement. The third-party suspect testified in his deposition that in addition to law enforcement's interview, which was purportedly accidentally taped over, law enforcement conducted a second interview sometime later, probably within a year or two of his first interview. During a recent deposition of this third-party suspect, the defense learned that he is pretty sure that he turned over his phone to law enforcement back in February of 2017. After the deposition, the defense alerted the prosecutor's office that the defense had no phone dump extraction evidence from his phone, and that no evidence whatsoever in the form of video, audio, reports, notes, or any type of evidence of law enforcement's second interview at the Logansport police station. So what's going on here? Still with us, Daryl Cohen, Eckler Mercy, Josh Schiffer.
Problem is you can voir dire on conspiracy theory. Anybody here ever hear of a conspiracy theory turned out to be true? Should you at least be able to hear that the conspiracy theory exists? And it's not just a conspiracy theory. It's from the state's own investigation that there are Odinists and that there's this, crazy connections. How many degrees from Kevin Bacon are you? That's what the state is trying to prevent the jury from even considering.
Well, the way things have been going, the defense has not been winning much in front of the judge.
It's looking more like a conspiracy because all of the actions just speak like corruption. The fact that you're not going to allow me to hear it, the fact that it's, I just lost evidence, all of that speaks corrupt. It's like you want to avoid the appearance of impropriety, and all I see is
and the other part of what's happening, Indiana changed their law to permit cameras in the courtroom. So it's judicial discretion. They've banned cameras from the courtroom in all these proceedings. Of any case where you would need them, a case where there's allegations against the corrections officers of practicing Odinists, of all these atrocities that the defense is alleging, but we're keeping it behind closed doors. Yeah, the public can wait online at 4:30 in the morning if they want to hear and see the evidence in the case, but that's the only way. To me, I just get this strange feeling from this case when you start putting all the pieces together. I'm not a conspiracy guy, Daryl, but they're blocking the cameras. They don't want the jury to hear about half of the investigation. What's really going on here?
They're separate issues, Vinny. I don't like the fact that they're blocking the cameras, but that has nothing to do with what the jury does or does not hear. I don't like it at all. I think that it needs to be fair and impartial, and we all need transparency, my magic word of the night.
Daryl needs an acronym for home cooking. That's what we need, because that's what we're seeing right here. Yeah. We're seeing a conspiracy among the powers that be to make them look as effective and legitimate as possible at the expense of sunlight, at the expense of disinfecting the community from conspiracy theories. If there's no conspiracy theory, why are you hiding the very mention of it? That breeds the conspiracy theory.
Less is more.
So what happens here if the jury is limited? They can't hear about any third party.
Motions to recuse. I am making all types of motions. We are not passing that.
Let's not forget the history, though. The judge kicked these lawyers off the case. They had to go to the Indiana Supreme Court to get back on the case.
Absolutely, and we will push this rock as slow as it needs to, because we will make motions. We will make motions. It's unconscionable to deny, it's unconscionable to deny the access to all of that information, to prevent a jury to be able to really hear a competent and zealous defense.
What I'm trying to understand is, because we've, even in the Karen Reed case, we're coming off the Karen Reed case, and there was some, the judge was like, listen, you gotta, slow down on the third party, you're a little late with that, but they were still able to mention things, cross-examine, and ultimately lay out their theory to a certain extent, Here, if the judge rules against the defense, which there's a good chance she could, because they've lost just about every motion in front of her, that what does this trial look like? What does it sound like? Like a defense attorney walking on eggshells?
I would hope that the defense attorney is not walking on eggshells. But on the other hand, obviously, there's no rapport between the defense attorney and the judge.
Yeah.
And so they've got to be cautious. The state has to prove it beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. But I keep coming back to how many confessions?
60.
Oh, that's
right
all.
at time, Josh.
No, you gotta
right at time.
lean
Yes,
into
we
it.
are.
You gotta lean into it. Show how unfair the judge is
All
being.
right. Josh Schiffer, Eckler Mercy, Daryl Cohen, thank you.